Have you ever had to manage a difficult team member? It can be a challenge, especially when personalities clash and work styles don't align. As women leaders, we tend to be conscientious of relationships and want everyone to enjoy their job. But this can sometimes hold us back from giving honest feedback. In this on-air coaching episode, Louise, a head of department in education, shares her struggles with managing a team member who lacks urgency and falls behind on tasks. If getting on the same page with someone has been a challenge for you, don't go anywhere. This episode is going to give you some things to think about. If you are new to the Women Taking the Lead podcast, hello and welcome. I'm Jody Flynn, and I'm the CEO and founder of Women Taking the Lead. It's a leadership development company that works with individuals, organizations, and boards to close the performance gap by attracting, developing, and successfully promoting more women into senior levels of leadership. These benefits are realized through coaching, consulting, leadership development programs, and keynotes. And if we are not already connected on LinkedIn, please send me an invitation to connect. You can find me directly at linkedin.com/in/Jody Flynn, or you can search on the platform for Jody Flynn. I am very active on LinkedIn, so I should be at or near the top of the search results. Be sure to add a note to the invitation letting me know you're a listener of the podcast. I would love to connect with you and get to know you better. Welcome to the Women Taking the Lead podcast, Louise.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm delighted to have you. As everyone knows, I've introed this episode, and we are doing an on-air coaching call. So thank you for applying to be on the podcast. And from what you shared, I think this is a great topic for people, especially new leaders, to hear about, because this is common across the board, common. So, but before we roll into, what you wanted to talk about today, give everyone a little insight into the work that you do and kind of the role you play in your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work in education and I work with students between the ages of 11 and 16. I'm a head of department. I've been teaching for 6 years and I've just gone into the role of head of department. So I'm responsible for the development of history and geography curriculums and leading all of the teachers within those departments. So it's been quite a change, but working in education is something that I've always really enjoyed. And this is the next step to that journey.
Absolutely. And it's a great place to be. And I'm sure with the work that you do, no 2 days are the same. There's always a new challenge and something,
yeah.
always something exciting going on to keep you on your toes. But there was something specific that you wanted to talk about today. So share with everyone and, get the ball rolling on what particular challenge are you dealing with in your new role?
So the thing that I found is learning that my role is management of people as well as history and geography. And I've got a member of my department who is a challenge and who is a personality that I've not had to be responsible for before in past, roles and responsibilities. And it's just dealing with someone who is quite resistant to the things that you're trying to do at every opportunity is something that I'm really struggling with, and it's been impacting the way that I lead other members of the team. So it's something that I really need to tackle head on.
Yes. And, as I was saying, this is so common that when we come into a new role, it's almost rare to take on a new leadership role and not have someone that you feel challenged by, whether overtly or just internally. You feel this person presents a growth opportunity for you. Like there's something here to learn. Like you just haven't come across this type of personality or challenge before. I love how you put that. It's not the person, it's the personality that you're finding some conflict with. So why don't we, considering we're talking about personalities, if you can, kind of describe your personality and then describe this other person's personality and where the conflict lies.
I would say that I try and go about things with a sense of humour, but I've got that typical British sarcasm, dry sense of humour, a little bit self-depreciating, trying to just get through the day. And that tends to work well with the people that I get on with. But I'm also really hyper aware of what I have to do, how I need to get it done, how that's going to impact other people and other timelines. And I put a lot of pressure on myself not to inconvenience anyone else's plans, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm just a cog in the higher up plan, then I will be really aware of this needs to be done so that everything else can be done. And I think the person that I'm working with is much more relaxed. They're much more jovial, lighthearted, and always having a laugh, but their sense of urgency just doesn't exist. And you set a deadline, nothing's responded to. I think when I started the position, it came across as very much a personal difference, and it's taken a lot to try and work out, okay, it's not that this person doesn't like me, it's just the way that they operate is different to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so it sounds like humor-wise, you both have a good sense of humor, which is great, right? That's probably helping the situation a little bit, right? Because when you have a good sense of humor and you see in somebody else a good sense of humor, you say to yourself, well, they can't be so bad, right? They can't be so bad because at least they have a good sense of humor and you align on that. Okay. So where the conflict lies is you have a greater sense of urgency in terms of getting certain work done to make sure other people are not inconvenienced by you holding anything up.
Yeah.
So for those who aren't watching, who can't see this because it's audio only, Louise's cat just jumped across the monitor. I've seen cats walk across the monitor. That's the first time I've seen a cat jump down.
She's half Bengal, so she does fly around the room sometimes.
I love it. I always love cats walking across the screen, and now I'll appreciate cats jumping across the screen too. So your cat has a good sense of humor as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I heard you saying is you don't want to be a cog in the wheel. So when there's something you need to get done that will help other people, be able to do their job, you feel a great sense of urgency to make sure it gets done. Whereas this other individual is more laid back. He does not feel that sense of urgency. So tell me about how this shows up.
I find that the main issues are deadlines aren't met. If we agree as a department that something's going to be done, they will always be the person that hasn't got it done or just avoids it completely. Things like responding to emails, keeping in contact have been a really difficult challenge. And where we are teaching in the classroom all the time, we don't have time to chase each other through the corridors or run to your classroom. Email is our main form of communication. Mm-hmm. And those conversations have happened where I've said, we need to keep up communication. We need to make sure we're on the same page. And I'm either met with, oh, I am, or just stone-faced, not willing to engage in the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think, like you said, having the good sense of humour as a similarity is really good, but you hit a point of frustration where you're working so hard and you see someone doing very little, and that's where you can slip into the bitterness, which I've often tried to avoid,
Right. Because there's some misunderstanding going on here, right? So, oftentimes because let me put it this way. How you go about things is you're very conscientious of other people. And when somebody else isn't behaving the way you would behave in a similar situation, we almost leap to, well, they're not conscientious, right? Yeah. And that is coming from our own perspective. We know what motivates us to do certain things. So when somebody else isn't behaving the way we would, we assume that they're just the opposite from us. And sometimes what it is, it's like, it's not the opposite. And it may not even be conscientiousness or a lack of conscientiousness going on with this individual at all. Sometimes, and this is just a for example, because I don't know what's motivating him yet. I haven't quite got the insight there. He may not feel that the communication is a problem at all, right? He may not be seeing any problem. Like, yes, he understands we need to stay on top of email, but what does that mean for him? Like for him, if you were to ask him, like, when I say you need to stay on top of your email, what does that mean to you?
Right. Yeah.
So let me ask you, Louise, when we're talking about staying on top of your email, what does that mean for you?
For me, it's checking regularly, like several times a lesson, to make sure that nothing urgent is happening or needs to be done.
Okay, so that's at least several times within an hour or so.
Yeah.
Correct? Okay. Is he clear that that's what you're expecting?
We've had a conversation about it, and the response has been, well, I'm so busy, my timetable's so busy. And I've tried to, put it forward in, it only takes a couple of minutes. Just have a glance every now and again. And that way they don't all pile up. And I must say, since we've had that conversation, he has been a bit more responsive to it, but only when it's quick wins. If it's like, oh, you've got a deadline that was the other day. Have you done that thing that I asked you to send me? That's just never responded to.
Right. Because he's going to get it done. Probably in his head, right? I'm kind of making this up. He doesn't want to respond to the email to say, I didn't do it. Yeah. I failed, right? Because that translates to, I've failed you. I'm not meeting expectations. He's probably thinking, I'll respond to that once I get done. What needed to get done, right? So he doesn't want to own up to that. Okay. So he's good with so he can do it. He can, once it was clear, here's what I'm expecting. He was responsive to that. Now he just needs a little more motivation on, okay, separately, the deadlines, because the deadlines are now contributing to his responsiveness to the email. Okay. Yeah. So let's look at that. Tell me about what's going on in terms of like, he's not hitting deadlines.
We have introduced a policy across the school of, we have to have 2 assessments done, 2 marking pieces of work done every half term. And it is a difficult thing to monitor and maintain. And we as a department have said, it is a challenge. But everyone else in the department has managed to hit those deadlines, or has let me know in advance if they're not going to hit the deadlines, which again, I always say that's fine as long as we've got a plan to work towards it. And when you look at their work and their deadlines, it's not being done, and I'm not being spoken to about it. And whenever I try and have that conversation, it's very much, oh, is that what we're doing? Oh, I didn't know. Or, yeah, I'm working on it. Or I'm so busy. This is so ridiculous. And it just feels like constant excuses. And I just think, everyone else who is also very busy is managing to do it. And I'm offering support and I'm offering help, and you're not taking it.
Okay. I believe you mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you applied, you mentioned this individual had the same issues were there with prior leaders in the position, right? You coming into the role and facing this challenge, this is not a new challenge for the person supervising him.
No, it's not at all.
Okay. So this is something that's been ongoing and nobody has cracked the code.
I don't think anyone's tried to crack the code. And I think that's where we're running into issues. Because I think that he might receive me as coming into a new position, and I don't want it to be read as I'm trying to assert my authority. I'm in charge. You need to do this. But it's just been this issue that hasn't been addressed for so long that now I look horrible for trying to change the way that it's been for a few years.
this is what happens, right? When we're not holding people accountable, you know, and giving people like constructive feedback in a positive, empathetic, even, you know, it doesn't have to be harsh, but like just letting people know whether they're meeting expectations or not and offering support, you know, we pass issues on to the next person. Now the next person has to deal with that. And I remember in a previous company, if somebody wanted to transfer into another department, you had to sign off as a leader saying that they were good, right? That they were a good employee, because you could not pass on to another department an issue that you were not dealing with, right?
Yeah.
So it actually would come to a head if someone wanted to transfer and you were like, I can't because you're not meeting expectations. And then as a leader, you looked ridiculous, because if you had not been addressing it or giving them the appropriate feedback, that never went well for leaders in that position. Okay. So now my brain is settling down a little bit. Okay. So he doesn't seem to be responsive to the conversation of, we all have to meet this other, you know, pretty much. Is he aware that he's the only one in the department that's not meeting this expectation?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And how has he responded to that information?
I think he's always shocked and kind of can't understand how we manage to do it, or how other people manage to do it, because I'm not always on top of it. But yeah, it's just this, it feels like feigned ignorance of, oh, I didn't realize we were all progressing so well. I thought we were all struggling. But every meeting we have, we talk about where we're at and what we're working on.
So he's well aware.
Yeah.
Okay. And sometimes that response can truly mean he's having a hard time wrapping his mind around the fact that everyone's on point. Right. And he's not, because he's struggling. Let me ask you this. If he were a student of yours, how would you approach this situation?
I think it would be a sit-down conversation. It would be having a conversation about the progress that they've made and saying, what's going on? Like, why are we having issues? Is there anything I can help you with? And breaking it down to move forwards.
And if the student had responded the way he had in prior meetings, where would you go from there?
If it was a student, I think I would acknowledge the attitude and the approach to it, and say, I've noticed that when we have these conversations, this is how you're responding. Why is that? Okay.
Have you thought about that approach?
No, because that terrifies me.
Wow. Okay, Louise, why does that terrify you? Tell me about that.
My line manager says, you know, you have to have these difficult conversations, and I don't want to have them.
Okay.
He's older, he's got more experience, you know. I just, in that sense, you've got the classic like imposter syndrome of, I'm not very good at this, I'm going to mess it up.
Okay. Okay. So this is more the concern about what the response would be.
Yeah.
But you're very comfortable.
Yeah.
But you're very comfortable with students. It's just you've attributed all of these other characteristics to this individual. He's older. He's probably been doing this for a lot longer, all of that. And the reality is he's struggling. He is struggling, you know, just like one of your students are. And this is the thing too, because sometimes I do comparisons with how we interact with children who are developing and how we interact with our team. And there is no disrespect in that, because at the heart of it all, we're human beings. Right. And we all, you know, tend to learn the same way. And your students, I mean, he is an adult, and adults do learn slightly differently, but we all, you know, sometimes need that conversation of, I've noticed this is how you respond when we, whenever we have this conversation. Tell me about that. You know, that that is the same conversation you can have with an adult. I don't know about you, but I have discovered amazing music, books, TV shows, movies, restaurants, and podcasts for sure because a friend or colleague told me about it. Our network, made up of friends, family, colleagues, and acquaintances, are a vital source of information and access to resources for us. If you find the content and suggestions from this podcast valuable, could you do me a huge favor? Could you share it with a friend or colleague? Typically, the best way to share a podcast is to share a specific episode that made you think of the other person. You can share an episode right from your podcast app, or you can send the link to the webpage found in the episode description. My goal is to help millions of women to grow and feel calm and confident in their leadership. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for helping me to do this. And I thank you for helping the woman in your life be the confident leader she is meant to be by introducing her to this podcast. So thank you.
I worry that it's going to come across as patronizing, though, to have someone who's a little bit younger than you say, oh, I've noticed that you're struggling. Like, what can I help you with? What if my fear is, A, he gets offended because he thinks I'm patronizing him, or B, he just says, no, I'm fine. And then I get stuck on the, oh, okay, bye.
Okay. Well, you felt comfortable saying to him that it only takes a couple of minutes to check your email. So tell me why that felt more comfortable than giving him feedback saying you've noticed a pattern.
I don't know. I think the second one feels a bit more personal, feels like the wrong word, but more intense. I'm looking at how you're behaving.
Yes.
And I'm aware of it. Whereas, oh, checking your emails only takes a couple of minutes. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Gotcha.
It's much more flippant. It's much more logistically easy to tackle, isn't it?
Yeah. You can walk away.
Yeah.
Oh, it just takes a couple minutes and we're done with this conversation. Yeah. I'm uncomfortable and I'm glad to be walking away right now. Okay. And yes. And the other one, it's you're holding him accountable.
Yeah.
He's going to be held accountable. Like as a leader, right? And as the person who is accountable to your performance, I have to talk about your performance with you. And the way you put it, the way you said it to the student, the first time, it was very direct, right? It was not patronizing at all. Just saying, okay, just want you to know I'm noticing something, that there is this response of you didn't know, or it's you're not overly concerned. However, he's showing up for you. You can give him that feedback, tell me about that.
Yeah.
It sounded very respectful. Like the way you spoke to your students sounded very respectful.
Okay, well, that's positive to hear. Then at least I know I can go into that conversation and it will sound okay, and it will sound, professional and respectful.
Yes. And you can even lay the groundwork a little bit and say, I've been meaning to have a heart-to-heart with you.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. I don't know if you would say heart-to-heart and
yeah. Given break the ice a little bit, he might be like, oh, Louise.
Okay, great, right? Because you could use humor.
Yeah.
We can call this a bit of a heart-to-heart, right? But you're doing it. I don't get yes, this is a frustration, right? You said after a while you get bitter, but what I hear in your voice and how you talk about this as well is you care about this person. You want him to do well. Yes, you want your job to be easier. And if he's responding to emails and hitting deadlines, your job would certainly be easier. But you do have a sense of respect for this person in terms of like their age and their how many years they've been in the classroom and doing this job, you know, and you do have an appreciation for their sense of humor. You want them to do well, you know, and coming from that place of, I want to have a great work environment. I want us to have a fantastic working relationship. I want you to be succeeding, you know, and when we talk, you tell me how time crunched you are, how under pressure you are. It sounds incredibly unpleasant.
Yeah.
You know, so let's talk about that, you know, and that opens up, you know, when you state where you're coming from, you know, and what your intentions are, it's easier for people to hear what you have to say. Right. So in these conversations, you do have to take a few moments to kind of give context to it and lay the groundwork. But once you open up and get a little bit vulnerable, right? Even 10%, like 10%,
Yeah.
like I care about you enjoying your job. I care about us having a great working relationship. I want, you know, this to be easier for you. So let's talk about that. If you get 10% vulnerable, it opens up the door for him to get 10% vulnerable too. He'll be more likely to open up about what's going on, even if it's just like kind of opening the door.
Yeah.
And it, you know, and it may look like more than one conversation, but if he opens the door, he opens the door. Right now, you can step through it.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting because I've been thinking about how I approach the whole working relationship. And I think before, I mean, even at the time that I applied to have this conversation with you, I was looking at it as a win-lose. Well, if I compromise on this, he wins and, you know, I have to give over and things like that. And one of my friends said, you know, part of being a middle leader and taking on a leadership responsibility is having that compassion for the people that you work with and, you know, doing your best to understand where they're coming from and how you can help, because ultimately it's my job to make sure that you can do your job. So how can I help? And when they said that to me, I was like, oh, you're right.
You just need to hear it from a couple of different places, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And the other thing we have to remind ourselves of, because, you know, it like the win-lose scenario sounds very competitive. Now we're competing against, you know, the person we're leading, and that doesn't feel good, right? Like
for anyone involved,
for anyone, because even a win, like in that scenario, a win wouldn't even be a win if they lose, because now you have someone that you lead who's just lost, right?
Yeah.
And so that doesn't feel good. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves that the people we're leading or managing, they don't wake up in the morning thinking, how can I really get on Louise's nerves today?
Exactly.
What can I do that would just send her blood pressure through the roof? Because that would be a good day for me. Most people, like at worst case scenario, want to fly under the radar, right? And just get through the day, get by, you know, but the sounds of it is like he might have some time management stuff going on, or he's got some priorities that might be like misaligned, you know, and until you know that, you just don't know, right? He could be truly struggling, you know, and not wanting to talk about it. And there might be some of that, like, oh, Louise is a new leader. How can she help me? Right. I've gotten that line from older gentlemen as well. You're, you know, X years younger than me. What can you do? What can you teach me? But you as a teacher know there are oftentimes you learn things from your students.
Yeah.
Yeah. You say things to them. You're in the same position where he can learn some things from you, right? You know this because he is struggling and there is some things you can offer him, right? But the thing is like when we learn from our students is sometimes when they're not even intending to try to teach us anything, they're just sharing.
Yeah.
Right. So perhaps coming at this conversation of, you know, I'm not trying to play teacher. over you. I want to share something that might be helpful.
Okay. Yeah. And again, you're stopping that patronizing element and saying, look, I don't want to be teacher student.
Yeah. Or manager, employee.
Yeah.
Department head, teacher, right? I know you're still in the classroom. So to a large extent, you're still very much like same level colleagues, but you have that added responsibility of making sure it's a well-run department.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to take on added responsibility and following up with people and managing them so that everyone's meeting the department goals. Do you feel ready to have that conversation?
I think I could have that conversation, at least start the ball rolling, because I think it got to a point where both of us were very frustrated with each other and it got very frosty for a while. And I've been thinking, we need to start to rebuild the connection there. And I think that might be the first step, and having a conversation and saying, look, let's talk about this and let's see how we can move forward and how I can help,
Yes. Yeah. Because that's the thing. You want to help them.
Yeah.
Right. And coming from that place. Perfect. Okay. When will you have that first conversation with him?
Well, conveniently, we've got our Easter break now, so we won't see each other for another 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It might be a good idea to have it fresh off the bat when we come back. So then we're in our last term of school before the summer holidays, and it's almost like turning over a new leaf, isn't it? And then you've got the term, and then we'll have a nice long break to hit the ground running again in September.
Absolutely. There are these reset points are perfect when there's already some change going on, right? Something new is happening, right? It's the new start of a new term. We're coming back from the break. We're getting ramped up again, and just inviting him into a conversation to say, hey, let's start off on the right foot. Like, let's have a conversation about what's going on so that I can support you in the way that you need to be supported. Okay. So when you come back from Easter break, you'll be having this conversation with him.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I think that'd be a good time for it.
Okay. Perfect. Anything else, Louise?
Just to do with my position.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you wanted to talk about?
It's not as large scale as what we've just been talking about, but one thing that's been rearing its head recently is that my old line manager, who used to be head of humanities, has now come back to the role of teacher and is working part-time. Mm-hmm. And, they were coaching me when I was becoming a teacher, when I was training. And now it's like the roles have reversed. Yeah. And I'm trying to implement things. And they did say to me before I took over, they said, don't feel like you're stepping on my toes. If you want to get rid of stuff, get rid of it. I don't care. But now when I'm like, let's try this, they're very much, oh, I'll do my own thing. Or I'm like, oh, you didn't attend this meeting. Oh, yeah, I didn't have to come. I was like, no, you did have to come. And it's a difficult conversation, but in a completely different way, because it's such a different relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have to approach that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So the relationship can create more challenges, but also can make it easier. Okay. Right? Because you can't, this was your mentor at one point. Yeah. Right. And now, and they gave you permission to have this conversation with them, essentially, not in so many words, right? But they set the standard of, it's okay for you to change things. It's okay. Don't worry. I don't want you to feel like you're stepping on my toes. They've already said you're not.
Yeah.
Right. So you can go into the conversation. And so again, setting the groundwork, setting the context of the conversation, call them back to that time when they said that to you.
Okay.
Just be like, hey, remember when you were coming back and you said you didn't want to step on my toes and you were totally open to change? I want to talk about that because again, here's what I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. And that will open and you can say, I admire you. I'm so grateful for all of the things that you've taught me. And I want this department to run well, right? You were big shoes to fill. And now I want to do the best job. So here I am having a conversation with you in order to achieve that.
Right. Yeah.
Because they may not realize.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, going part-time as well, you start winding down and doing a little bit less. And yeah.
And when you're part-time, I've heard part-time people say this as well. They undervalue the role that they play and the impact that they have. They're like, oh, I'm just a part-timer. I'm just kind of, I'm in and I'm out and I'm not really here. And you're like, but if you're here, you're here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
And we're only a small team anyway. So any kind of deviation or change or issue is magnified, isn't it? I think there's 5 people in my department, 5.5, let's say.
Right. Absolutely. So if the, half position is kind of in and out and not following the same rules as everybody else, that's still impactful, even if they are part-time, right? Because sometimes it's just human nature, right? We kind of watch how our leader is interacting with other people to find out what can we do and not do. And it's not, where are the boundaries, right? We are naturally, as human beings, we want to know where the boundaries are.
Yeah.
And we constantly test them. Even if it's not every day, even if it's only every now and again, there will be a stress test on the boundaries because we want to know, is this still true?
Yeah.
Do we still have to attend all the meetings? Do we still have to hit all the deadlines? Which for some people can be a little bit tedious to have to constantly remind people of the expectations and the boundaries and what, all of that. But it's important just because we're working with human beings, right? Yeah. So we always want to know, have there been any changes? Are we still good? Does this still apply? And so, yes. And having the conversation, and that is something your former line manager will understand. Right? Yeah. You being the former line manager set a tone in the department, even though you're part-time. You still have an impact. People still watch what you do and how you show up. So you can even say, I'm asking for your support.
Yeah.
To do this. How does that feel?
You make it sound so much easier. In my head, it becomes this big thing of, they're going to hate me. And when you actually talk about it and what it's going to look like, you think, oh, that's not going to be that bad.
Oftentimes these kind of conversations, even if you haven't gotten coaching before going into them, don't you often feel on the other side, wow, that went much better than I thought it was going to. I feel so much better now that I've had this conversation. Our brains catastrophize. Right? Because we're looking for threats. The way our brain works is it wants to keep us safe and it wants to avoid any kind of a threat. So our brain oftentimes goes to, what's the worst thing that could happen in this situation? Not from let's just call it out and make it easier, but our brain will play out all of these scenarios where the conversation goes off the rails and we've hurt the relationship, right? So those are the stakes our brains are creating for us, when the reality is most people are pretty reasonable, right? If you tell them why something is important or why you need to have the conversation and where you're coming from, they're like, oh, okay.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yes. And which is how most of these conversations usually go. As long as we stay in, like you said, like we don't want to be patronizing. We don't want to be disrespectful, but you're not that type of person, right? You are respectful. You are considerate and kind to people. So bringing that energy, and intention to the conversations will serve you well and help these conversations go smoothly.
Yeah. I think, I've always thought, well, since I got this role, I always thought, okay, well, now I need to be really stern and harsh. And now I'm realizing, no, you don't have to do that at all. That doesn't work.
No. There is certain personalities, not harshness, but sometimes being direct and sometimes stern right? But it's more, I think of like the puppy personalities, right? The people who just have lots of energy, you know, like we love them, but sometimes they need directness,
Yeah.
you know, not because they're bad, but they just bring a different energy to the table. But they're very rare, the type of person who needs you to be super direct and kind of stern and direct, right? Those are the type of people who want to know that there's going to be consistency and that there are expectations and that sort of thing. Most adults operate from a place of like, you tell them the expectations and they're good with it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else, Louise?
No, I think that's it. Clearly, conversations are my my area of development.
You know, and it's not uncommon. I think having those, and you know, what's really funny is this episode is coming out just after I've done some episodes on giving constructive feedback, you know, from a positive way. So this was perfect timing because this is the common thing, right? Because like most women, especially women leaders, we're very conscientious of relationships and how important relationships are. And we just want everyone to enjoy their job, right? You know, or at the very least, you know, not be what's causing people to not like their jobs, right? Yeah, exactly. And if we can go even further and be the reason why people enjoy their jobs, great, you know. But, you know, that can be a sticking point and can hold us back from giving honest feedback. And honest feedback doesn't mean unkind or harsh. It's just honest, right? Yeah. Like this is true for me, right? Mm-hmm. This is the situation. These are the facts. This is what I'm noticing, right? Those are honest conversations. So I thank you for getting vulnerable and being open about that this is a stumbling block for you. And it's such the potential for growth, right? Because if you can get comfortable with these types of conversations, your job gets so much easier, right? Because you're having them right when problems crop up. You're able to have the conversations rather than waiting for them and having them fester.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, Louise, thank you so much for, you know, applying and being, and, you know, just sharing your challenges so other women leaders can learn from your experience. So I cannot thank you enough.
And thank you. You know, this has been so useful and I'm so grateful to get to have this conversation with you. Thank you.
What were your takeaways from this on-air coaching call? If you've been frustrated with a team member who is not meeting expectations, were you able to see a different approach you could take in an upcoming conversation with that person? What would you do differently? Head over to LinkedIn to share your thoughts and takeaways on the post corresponding to this episode. I want to hear from you as to what stood out most for you and what you took away. And if your last promotion has you experiencing and confronting challenges you haven't faced before, consider working with me. I would love to support you through this transition, help you get your feet back under you and feeling confident in your leadership once again. You can find the link to schedule a time to chat with me in the episode description. If you're listening through a mobile device, that link will be in your podcast app. If you are listening through the Women Taking the Lead website, the link will be toward the bottom of the episode webpage. As always, I hope this was of value to you, and here's to your success.